Good afternoon, everyone. Artificial intelligence is the buzzword right now. Everybody is talking about it. There's lots of questions around what that will do to jobs in India, globally, and so on. Today, we have a very representative panel, I would say, because the industries that we represent over here cover all the key issues that you will see with artificial intelligence that's coming on board. We have Vibha, who can cover insurance is obviously based all around data, and data is the sort of source for AI. And I think it'll be great to hear not just about insurance, but maybe more broadly about financial services and what you've seen. Janmejaya, as the chairman of BCG, advises, I think, all industries in terms of what's happening with this new technology and what the implications will be as we sort of get into a completely different way that business will happen. And I think it'll be great to give a broad perspective. I think Sudhanshu with media, I think they're in the eye of the storm. They have all the global players coming to India and bringing their AI-based recommendation engines and so on. I'm sure they're also doing the same, and we'll love to hear more about what Viacom is doing. And Mukundan with the whole industry 4.0, I think there is a very fundamental shift that's happening in all aspects of industry, starting from production all the way to actually getting it to the consumer or the end customer, and how data is sort of playing a role. So I'd love to sort of just have each of you just maybe talk a little bit about what you are seeing in your industries, and then we'll go back and have questions. Vibha, you would like to start?
Thanks, Sandeep. You rightly mentioned about insurance and broadly in financial services. The kind of growth that we have seen so far has been largely transactional. Especially in insurance, it's been in the build stage of we as a private sector have been in existence for 19 years. So it's been more about customer acquisition, getting your market share, listing, the usual kind of a lifestyle or life cycle. Now it's the time, and that's what HDFC Life has been realizing about 5 years ago, and then we embarked upon a transformation to separate out India and Bharat. Reason being that with that separation, we can be a lot more nuanced in terms of who's our customer, where can we sensibly spend our money, because just carpet bombing, whether it is to get new customers or on how we service them, how we finally pay the claims or the maturity amounts, means that a nuanced approach will ensure that where we perceive risk that's where we can emphasize our focus more as against one size fits all. And that's something that we feel that our journey of going down the AI path and robotics generally speaking has helped. 2-3 examples that I can give, and we have lots more. So for example, as of today, we have employed 150 bots in our company, big and small, and we, although it's anecdotal, but we are fairly sure that that's by a mile. And what that does is everything from figuring out when a person goes in for medicals. Earlier we used to get each guy who goes for a medical test, before we can issue him with a term policy, we used to have to do medical underwriting, which meant doctors look at it, a panel looks at it, reinsurers look at it. Today, when he goes for medical tests at a small clinic, we know through various parameters, built through artificial intelligence, which is built by our own data, because industry is unfortunately yet to share data, although that's also something that we have been at the forefront of trying to nudge our peers. But with our own data, which is now we have 2 decades of data to say, if a person with these kind of parameters, this kind of background, this kind of, he might already be our customer, or he might be a customer of another partner, through Sybil data and other such platforms, we are able to have a nuanced approach of propensity to defraud the company. And it's a score, which is our own score, and it's a dynamic score. So it's an ongoing method of learning through artificial intelligence, which continues to have feeders inside. And as a result of which, we today do less than 15% of what we might have otherwise done in terms of actually underwriting that policy, medically underwriting the policy. Another example of AI is our salespeople, and we've rolled this out in our own direct channel, wherein we want to set a salesman up for success. What that means is that instead of telling him, I've recruited you, now go and sell insurance, after maybe we typically go through maybe 40 hours of training, rather than that, or in addition to that, we would say, again through AI, we've built a hyper-personalization platform, which is on his app. What it does is it says, okay, you belong to Kalba Devi area. Earlier, the jewelry market around that, go there. This is the kind of simple policy. We have warmed up the lead, go and sell that policy. It's almost like gamification to say, okay, very, very good. Now that you've sold your first policy ever, this is the amount of money that you've got in your kitty. It's virtual money, but that's what you've got. Now you go and sell that, but before you sell that, go through a training nugget. The training nugget does not take more than 5 minutes of his time. It's a very simplified version. So he reads that training nugget, knows a little bit about what he's going to sell, knows a little bit about who he is going to sell it to. There is a comfort zone. He goes and sells that. And that's the kind of journey that we go through. It's gamification, but more importantly, AI shows that how this particular salesperson is demonstrating whatever we are feeding him and what's his success rate, and it goes on learning about that particular individual or that kind of cohorts of people that are selling. Another example is that flash underwriting, wherein instead of again doing underwriting one size fits all, based on parameters, we would say, okay, we know that so-and-so distributor, salaried, not in certain pockets, income proxies, let's just go through straight through underwriting, because again we know that the propensity for it to result in a fraudulent claim or any other negative parameters, mis-selling complaint is that much lower. Facial recognition is another example, wherein today we are able to, because typically insurance is a long-term product, unlike a lot of other financial services products. So the guy might come in after 10 years. He looks very different to his whatever document, typically a PAN card or Aadhaar as it used to be. So through facial recognition, we are able to see that this guy, if he looked like this when he was in his mid-30s, is likely to look like this. And so we're not trying to figure out, okay, this guy doesn't look anything like what the photo looks like. So those sorts of things, and dynamic learning is something that we are finding is the only way forward, because the numbers are staggering in terms of number of policies, number of payments that we make, and for us to be able to pinpoint where is the risk and to just focus on those areas.
Janmejaya, can I request Sudhanshu to go next, and we'll do the various industries first and then come back for you.
No, I think Vibha has sort of touched upon some already, but in media the challenge has been very interesting. See, we started out with very little data at one level. And when I say very little data, I mean, there has been data in the industry, but most of the data existed for post-evaluation. So I think, therefore, if you look at television meters, they are basically measuring what have you watched. So it's largely post-evaluation. That is one piece. Even if you look at ticketing, I'm saying if you look at theaters, so depending on how the film has performed in different places and all that. So there was data there, but that was largely post-evaluation. Ability to use real-time data, the ability to customize data is something which is absolutely new to the industry. And therefore, for the creators, sometimes when you talk of data, they feel you are sort of, infringing on their basic right to work. And therefore, there is always this tussle between data and creativity, and basically both gut and data in a manner of speaking. I think in our opinion the two can coexist, and therefore the journey which we are starting on, and it is a journey, is we are using a lot of this now. I think so, for instance, today there is a lot of AI which is used in improving your advertising, advertising, what we call advertising TRPs, or basically, so break in, break out, which is just to sort of explain to you, you are watching a show, but immediately when the show sort of moves into an advert, there is a propensity to move out of that and go to something else. So the thing is, how do we improve the rating of the advertising to be as close to as the rating of the show? And how do you decrease the drop? And that makes a big difference. We are using a lot of it in legal as well. We are using a lot of AI in online from a production point of view when it is coming in, and therefore from the conforming to the laws as well. So that's another interesting piece. But the most recent and very interesting example and recommendation engines you talked about, I think that these are things which are now being improved. And so to us, data therefore, basically the area where we are now sort of beginning to use AI in our digital piece is what we are doing in the latest work which we've done, which is called remarketing to a digital consumer. And in the remarketing to a digital consumer, once we know that a person has gone on our app and has watched some kind of content, we know that person. And the more the person uses the app, inshallah, the more we know the person. I'm saying that keeps growing, and so you keep learning more. But what we are doing for our remarketing and this thing is that starting from a creative to that person, being able to sort of crawl the person wherever the person is on this thing and targeting and reaching out is all being done by machines, including the advert or the marketing thing which is being made by the person. So there is no intervention at all at any level. I think the only area where it can continue to get a little better, in my opinion, is can you make the creative a little better? Because as of now, the creative is, you've seen a few shows, so it tends to assemble some of those and tries to do that. But I think that's the piece. But we are able to then target and segment at an individual level. The journey is on. I think the next piece which we are working on, which is pretty unique to India, maybe perhaps the first solution maybe anywhere in the world, is basically working on the customer lifecycle management and customer lifecycle value. The work in most parts of the world on customer lifecycle value has happened on subscription-driven models, because most parts of the world actually operate on subscription-driven models. What we are attempting to do, and this is work in progress, is to see how do I have a positive customer lifecycle value of acquisition on an advertising-led model. And I think so the variables which we are playing with here are extremely high, but this entire piece is very interesting now. And as we are building an organization, we are building a lot of data science and analytics capabilities, so much so that we are building a dedicated center in Bangalore, which now already has 100+ people, which is almost 7-8% of our employee strength. And if you were to ask some of these questions 3-4 years back, people would say, what are you talking about? What is this all about? So that's a quick thing from my end.
Yeah, as far as manufacturing industry is concerned, we are constrained as well as enabled by engineers. Engineers love this. Many of them say, how can it do this? So there's a bit of a challenge which we have. But in terms of what we've done, we've sort of broken it down into what we need to do internally and what we need to do externally. In terms of internal work, I think it all started, as far as we were concerned, in the area which we are most comfortable with, which is manufacturing and operations and maintenance. So most of our critical equipment, we started with making what we call as digital twin. And these guys took out all the operating parameters, put that into data sets, and then had an engine running behind it to sort of mimic the main physical equipment, and then sort of say, listen, I think it's got 1,000 hours to failure, or maybe this parameter, if you tweak, your operation efficiency will improve. You've got so much money to be saved. And I think that proof of concept in couple of turbines and couple of boilers really helped us to build a case that we can build what is called a digital factory itself, which is complete digitized version of what we were doing in the virtual world to help people come to terms with better decision making. So what Industry 4.0 we first sort of put on the ground has been completely internal to enable the current operating teams to sort of perform better. And this whole fear of them getting completely dislodged and supervisors losing their job, workers losing their job, we had to overcome that initial resistance even with the unions and others. Now they sort of welcome that this is really providing. The second area where we really brought to bear this whole area of data is about safety and safety behaviors. We are now able to real-time monitor movement of people within the plant, where they are they in safe zones, unsafe zones. And in terms of maintenance, some of the critical equipment, we are able to virtually show them on a screen what is the best methodology to achieve the results which are actually a world class or up to the mark. So that's been the internal work. In terms of outside, the best example I can give you is what we've done in agriculture field with farmers, using satellite imagery, land-based sensors, and giving solutions to farmers based on data which is predictive in terms of pricing models in the market, and telling them what crop will make the best sense for them to go ahead next season, keeping in mind all the conditions which exist. Also giving them advance warning in terms of, what kind of sort of sprays you need to put in place to save the crop. We can almost predict 2-3 days before an attack with how it needs to sort of. But this piece is still an early stage. If you see our accuracy and predictability in this, what we are running as pilot is about 80%. We don't get 100% right, but the engine itself is learning. The accuracy is increasing as the data sets, we keep on feeding more and more. In terms of internal talent, I think it's an early stage as far as we are concerned. We are just putting a whole scheme in place which we call as a unified contextual experience for our employees. And that also holds true for our customers. What we are saying is there's one experience you get as an employee, and it must be contextual in the sense that a sales and marketing guy, when he opens his flat screen, he must see what is relevant to him, and we are not going to dump data which he is not relevant to him. And whereas a purchase manager will see a completely different kind of a real estate on his mobile phone, which is populated with data relevant to him. So firstly, giving them what we call as a unified and contextual experience. The second thing we are trying to automate through AI, and I don't know whether really it is AI, but we think it is AI, is the whole concept of learning and innovation. Can we take our employees through various stages? And I think this is an early stage of work. We are increasingly believing that the future belongs to not narrow specialists, but future belongs to people who are specialized, but also are shaped like a T, for want of better. And I think the elements which we are missing in many of our employees is things like design thinking, things like how do you bring digital into your workspace? Also, how do you bring a greater amount of emotional quotient into your entire dealing? I think these are things which we are trying to sort of, how do you allow employees to learn, innovate in this whole space? Finally, I think it all boils down to, I think not ignoring one critical piece when you want to implement in the company. How do you make a success of it? How do you sort of embrace it step by step is on, I would say, nudging behaviors in the right direction, and while keeping the core purpose intact. I think Mr. Deepak Parekh spoke about purpose. I think that is something we must keep intact. How do you move the culture forward in the right direction, in the right context for the world of tomorrow?
Great. So I think, Janmejaya, with 3 different industries.
So the first caution I must give us all is that with machine learning and data and artificial intelligence, be warned. Your only privacy is somebody else's disinterest. So don't be interesting, because then you'll have no privacy. And every company, especially people like Sudhanshu, are dangerous, because how many seconds you watch a show for, they will be tracking. She will be doing the same, So it's really dangerous to be able to, in today's world, have any data which is out there. But of course, I have to say that the hype around artificial intelligence right now is greater than its use. Roy Amara in 1967 had said, the impact of technology is overestimated in the short run, but underestimated in the long run. And that actually is true with artificial intelligence right now, because there are 2 battles that are going on. Battle number 1 is between artificial intelligence and artificial ignorance. Because artificial ignorance comes out very easily if the way you store your data and the data that's there and the algorithm is not as sharp and as robust as it can be. In fact, then the answers that you get are actually, whether they are at 80% or at 90%, they can be fundamentally flawed. And so right now the process of these algorithms getting more and more robust is actually on. That thing is going on right now. I mean, will we still need people for content, or will all content be delivered through machine learning and understanding personalization of different people? But the other much greater battle which is on is the fact that in countries where average ages are 35 and 40, there is a huge fight between experience and imagination. Because all your experience has been in an earlier period, working in a different way, using data in a different way. Things like ordinary least squares for statistics doesn't really work anymore. You don't need that. but everyone's been trained on that in econometrics. So as you change, there is this big challenge. How do you actually, if your boss Chandra keeps saying that all our minds have got CPU and RAM. So when we start, we have a lot of RAM and very little CPU. But as we age, we have a lot of CPU and very little RAM. And so all that CPU is experience, which is really challenged with the amount of data and its use. And so how that other battle works out will allow for the speed of this change and the fact that it gets established. Because this whole process, this journey is on. And when it will fundamentally change decision making, whether we will need doctors of what kind, will we have skin specialists which will be machines or doctors? I mean, all those questions will actually come up. So I think it's a very interesting phase right now. There are all these battles which are going on, but in all of this, the hype right now, in my view, is more than what's actually happening. So in every company that you go to, every CEO is talking about it, but the amount that it's actually affecting core business is much less than what it can be.
So, I think, Janmejaya, you bring up an interesting point that I don't think anybody today is saying that this is not here to stay, right? It's coming. We heard 3 of the CEOs talk about what they're already doing, right? And what I heard Vibha say or what Sudhanshu says is actually very deep now. And even in the manufacturing space, it seems like it's becoming, quite pervasive. Interesting question I would have for you is, you mentioned the point of data sharing. Janmejaya mentioned the point about privacy, right? Completely at odds. Now let me take a scenario where a worker working at Tata Chemicals, watching Woot on Viacom, comes to you for insurance. Do you see data sharing happening across industries which will allow you to make better decisions? And how does that change this notion of privacy?
Definitely. And I just want to caveat it by saying that because of data privacy, and I completely disagree with what's happened on Aadhaar, because we need to address concerns over data privacy. It doesn't mean that we cannot sensibly share data to be able to give a differentiated experience. And I'll give you an example. So we're the only company to have tied up today with 24 what is called as new ecosystem partners. So we have the cab aggregator companies like an Uber, Ola, we have education companies, we have health companies, digital health companies or like your HealthSpring, so on and so forth. We have a Paytm. So let me take the example, say of an Ola, as an example of to explain or answer your question better. So a guy who's 2 people who are sitting in 2 different Olas, knowing whether they upload their Ola account of 999 rupees or 99 rupees. Other proxies earlier, before Aadhaar was pulled, I would know that he lives in Kandivali, he comes to BKC every day, twice a week he goes to MCA, once a week he goes to soda bottle opener wala, etc. Right? Now whether we like it or not, those digital footprints are there. Those will not be shared with us as an insurance company, but they will be given a score by whoever the digital partner is, by saying and agreeing parameters with us to say this is the score out of 10, this guy is a 6. So as an insurance company, I would say to all the 6 guys, give him for 149 rupees, give him a 100,000 rupee cover. That is significantly cheaper than what I would otherwise give if he came through the front door as say an agency client or a prospect. It might be 3x more expensive, but because I'm able to get a profile of that customer a lot sharper through the use of the shared data, but nevertheless it's restricted shared data, I will not know his specifics. I can give him a differentiated underwriting. And my original example of 2 guys sitting in 2 different cabs one will get one offer, other might get twice that premium offer. For me to be able to catch or instill the necessity to start young, to buy insurance, that's the only way that I can do it. So that's an example of the way forward.
And I want to tie that back to, Mukundan, the point you made about learning and innovation, right? So this is an interesting scenario. You said you brought safety compliance as a big issue. Now that has actually a lot of learning behind it in terms of your workplace behavior and the machinery usage and so on. Tying that back to what Vibha said in terms of, would you incentivize your workers to get cheaper insurance by following certain procedures and therefore be more open to sharing data? How do you see that sort of panning out?
So let me just take an example and tell you it's all cultural. We forget AI, forget data sets. I think we've had this issue of sharing data, and so we have a practice in the factory of, for example, if somebody has had a near miss, reporting it, which means you were walking down the stair, you may have tripped because that thing is not proper. I'll put your name and say that Sandeep and this incident happened. In US, they will not do it. They think it is wrong for somebody else to write about another person. They think you're intruding into privacy. We've had huge issues with union there that, and they think this data can be used by management to fix unionized workers. This is a cultural issue there. We now have this GDPR coming in UK, for example. We have a unit in UK. And clearly we have to lock down all our employee and customer data if there's an individual customer data which we have. And we simply cannot share it. It's not open for sharing because it is by law prohibited without his permission, his or her permission, right? So I think we are learning there are limits. Even when we were designing these learning points, where somebody would go to that app and sort of learn a subject and you would get a point. In India, when we designed it, we were saying we will also put the face of someone who scored the highest learning point in the team to motivate people to move forward, right? And when our UK team looked at it, they said, no, you cannot do that. You cannot on a screen of this individual show a point of another individual, even though it's not affecting performance appraisal, it is not affecting any. So I think it's a very sensitive matter. I'm glad that Janmejaya brought that up, and I think it's not something we can solve. In India and in Asia, we somehow feel that sharing is okay. But that's not the context in UK, that's not the context in US. So when you're running a global organization, I think you need to also worry about what kind of issues you face and would you have the same kind of data sharing going on there. And those employees need comfort. SEBI changes a rule in India and says that a CEO's direct reportees' data has to be shared with them. Up till now, it was the KMP. KMP definition has changed. So a CEO in US is part of my direct report. Now, do I get, with the data which we get is your name, spouse name, your spouse's brother, your brother's spouse. They are not going to share it.
Yeah.
It is unimplementable even though SEBI wants it. So I think there are limits to what we can get. So this data issue itself is an issue, but I think as far as machines are concerned, we are happy to share it because machines don't have the similar rights as you and I. So if you say, your turbine performance data, will you share it with BHEL, with GE? We will certainly share that.
Yeah, that I can see, the preventative maintenance bit, there's a lot happening right now. Janmejaya, going back to when you are sitting in the boardroom with the CEOs and with board members, and this question comes up that, more and more of your competitive advantage is being driven by the use of data, by the use of artificial intelligence and so on, versus this issue that we are discussing. How do you advise the senior management, or how do you advise the board members on the path forward?
See, there are a set of issues which are out there. Firstly, the filing clerk in a bureaucracy used to be important because he could hide your file. Today, do you know that data engineers are more in demand than data scientists? Because how you set up the data lake and how you store that data. I mean, in BCG, we are finding it impossible to get data engineers. We are getting data scientists, but you're not getting data engineers. And unless you organize that data, it is almost inaccessible in the time that you need it. The other issue, which is many companies are not doing right now, and the RBI has absolutely missed it right now actually, is the geopolitics and the risks that come out of geopolitics in respect to data. If you see what US is saying with regard to Visa and MasterCard and data storage, if there were sanctions and your data was not stored with you, many companies would become inoperational. It would be as serious as that. So when you are a board of a company You need not just to understand how you use data, you need to be very careful about understanding the risks with data. And I have to say that currently the level of understanding of this is exceedingly shallow. I don't believe companies have done a mock. You know, when Merck's had that attack on them, they had to pay $300 million to get their data back, you know, and get their computers working. Now, I don't know how many of the boards in India have done a mock that, you know, this is the demand that has come. How do you react to it? In what space? Will you pay? Will you not pay? What happens if you lose it? You know, I mean, I really am not sure. So the number of issues around this and the number of dimensions that they cover, if you have a class action suit against you in the US on misuse of your data about your gender or one particular preference or the other, I mean, it's unclear who is thinking about that and how deeply.
I see. Sudhanshu, you know, you are, I guess, more than others, really competing in a global market. And today, you know, content is being designed, you know, Amazon is in India, you know, Netflix is in India, they're all going after the same studios that you're going with. They have obviously over time built their recommendation engines and the use of AI in global markets, and they're bringing that to India, whereas you're trying, you know, as you've built the team, you're now collecting all this data and so on. How do you come up the learning curve faster to compete with global players? Because this is going to be an issue that everybody in India will face, because they'll see global players coming in with much better technology that they've built. How are you competing in that?
No, I think it's a good question, Sandeep. I think, there are two dimensions to it, and you know, one is the hard piece, which is about recommendation engines, the quality of the product, you know, and the way the app works, and that's so and so it's served. Now, in that also, there are, if you were to start breaking it down, there are some things which are now almost white label solutions. So it's not a big problem today. I'm saying, so you know, your ability to come to speed on something is reasonably fast, if I could use that.
So the tools
word.
that you can buy from
yeah,
IBM.
So that is not. There are certain, of course, there are certain areas which are a little bit more proprietary. I think recommendation engines, particularly, and parts of recommendation engines, is one where there is this thing. The second piece, which is important, is as we step out as well, and we have to take care of data protection and GDPR and data privacy laws and all that. So therefore, those are areas which we need to strengthen further. But when we started out, see, we had very little technical capability and engineering, you know-how in the organization. And we partnered with a lot of people, and I think through partnership we've been able to manage it. I think how we balance this in India ourselves, and I think some of my peers or our peers in the industry, is you balance it with your understanding of the country and your understanding of the Indian consumer. And media is both global, but it is also very culture specific. So I think, and therefore there are two types of stories. There are universal stories and there are culture stories. And especially in a country as diverse and as big as India, with 16 plus languages and all the kinds of nuances of culture which we have, I think where we will perhaps score for a little bit of time is our understanding of this, our understanding of those languages, our understanding of that consumer, our
the
ability
insights,
to
how
make
to
those
use the
content,
insights.
that piece, which is the content, and where we will catch up is on the on data and on engineering and some of those pieces. And I think it'll be the vice versa for some of those guys. So I think that's how you will compete. Because remember that in India, I think on some of these, the two new apps which have come and all that they are there, amongst the 5 large Indian players, which is basically, we do 90,000 hours of original content every year. And India does about 100,000. As it is, India does a lot of content, but we do 90% of that across languages and across different forms, long form, short form, film and all that. So basically, and that's a lot. And the other interesting feature about India is slightly ahead of the curve from US in this, because all the 5 guys who are there in India have done their own apps. US is now going back, and the traditional guys are doing their own apps. Of course, you heard the Disney Plus very recently. Yes. So we've already done that. So therefore, the content which is available, I think which is being done by the others. So to give you a comparison, Vicon does 15,000 hours of content, Netflix has shown an intent to do 150 hours of content.
150
150 hours.
versus 15,000.
So therefore it is sharply, and today a lot of the stuff which we do is television first, but with the eyeballs moving, we will be able to move it to digital as well. And we've demonstrated that. If I take just 1 minute, I think we used to do a show called Silsila, which is a love triangle on TV. It's urban show, partly bark measurement, partly I think whatever. So it was middling on television. So it was like, what we call 1.5 TVR, which is okay, neither here nor there. So we decided not to continue on television after about 100 episodes. But the show was doing exceedingly well on Boot. So it started picking up from about 100,000 views per day and had climbed to 2.2 million views when we said that we should pull the plug. We took the decision to continue the show on digital. So off on television, onto digital. We moved from 2.2 million views per day to close to 7 million views per day. Immediately, and the show has been so successful. We are doing season 2 now. So what I'm trying to say is that basically it's going to play out like this. It's a different market, but I think that's where. But I think our challenges will be more in the area of culture, more in the area of both culture internal and being able to build that, as Deepak was talking about. That's very important, and also being able to understand and live up to the culture, the society we are living into, and what is the boundaries? How do you draw those boundaries? Those are the challenges. Those are things which will continue to always be there, because there will be people who will push back. At the same time, I'm saying the creative guys will also continue to stretch the envelope. So I think that's where the piece.
So I think sort of you're hinting to a point which I think I want to bring up, that you're starting to hear a lot more about, that the use of AI has an ethical implication to it, right? So we've talked about data engineering and so on, but there's also the algorithms that are behind this, and so the question that arises is, as we are entering this space in India in particular, and we're already seeing some of this impact in the US. So for example, in the US, there was a bank that actually deployed underwriting using AI, and very quickly discovered that they were excluding blacks in a particular market. And it wasn't because anybody had actually sort of purposely done it, but it was the way that the data was being collected, the way the data was being organized, and the algorithms that were coming out of that. And that very quickly caused the bank to shut the whole thing down, right? So rather than saying, how do we fix it, it just became such a big PR disaster that they just sort of shut the thing down. How do you prevent that? Going back to your point, Janmejaya, that if we don't get this right, this could potentially result in things that could be positive not being brought into the mainstream. So how do we address the ethical issues? You brought up the point that how it happens in your UK subsidiary or your US subsidiary doesn't happen in India. We've seen this with China as well, right? China has gone to the extreme with what they're doing with facial recognition and so on. How do you see all of that playing out in India?
The term ethics is very interesting, because governance modes are very different, and societies have agreed different forms of contracts with their state. So if you just look broadly right now, the US, the data is with the GAFA or whatever you call them, right? In Europe, you have GDPR, which has come in as a late entrant, but has tried to actually capture it. People believe that in data in China is with the state, Right. And now, are the Chinese unhappy? Who knows? Are the Americans unhappy with what Facebook is doing? You can hear what's going on in Parliament, in the British Parliament, the Facebook has been called thugs. The truth is, there is no consensus on ethics, and societies are in very different phases. The liberal democracy which had taken the Anglo-Saxon press and decided what is right or wrong in the world is under fundamental challenge. So we do not know what are good ethics. The questions are very profound. What freedoms are you entitled to in return for what? What are these various contracts which are out there? And you look across the world, democracies are in trouble right now. There is huge amounts of polarization. You look at authoritarian regimes, you need to see how data flows up and how it gets, recently in Saudi, dissidents were being picked out, consulting firms were helping them catch people. So I'm saying that this journey is beginning right now. The issues have not been resolved.
And which is why I think it's important that as we I think Vibha, so you brought up a lot of examples,
Yeah,
right?
because Sandeep, there I do feel very strongly, and I want to take 2 minutes here,
Yeah.
that we can talk about where the West is today, but we are leapfrogging. West is there in terms of saying, okay, you can't have your personal data out, etc. But there are a whole host of other things which are checks and balances. And I'll give you an example why I feel extremely frustrated in insurance, because we want to leapfrog to some bits of the West without having gone through the journey. Couple of examples. One is that last year, we, through our analytics, we cancelled, suo moto cancelled policies based on risk assessment worth about 300 crores of sum assured. It amounted to something like 150 policies, people, individuals. Out of that, only 5 individuals came back to say, why did you cancel my policies? And out of that, only 2 individuals did we reinstate the policies. So these people are just fishing. They will buy the policy, lie low for 3 years. After that, regulatorily, I cannot cancel their policy. They will put in a claim of an individual who's already dead or is an impaired life. Now, if I had their data in some form or shape with all the checks and balances, for example, we took the example of UK. In UK, you cannot get medical treatment without an NHS number. In India, you can go incognito and get your medical treatment done. In fact, the modus operandi for general insurance companies is that, do you have health insurance? I will charge you differently, right? And that's an accepted fact. So how do I give the truthful guy, how do I give slashed premiums? Today I'm pricing it based on the outlier who is taking me for a ride. There are entire economies in India, micro markets, everyone is hand in glove. Every document looks kosher, every document is forged. I'll give you another example, Credit Protect, which is what we cover for NBFCs. We write almost 3,000 crores of business there. Out of that, in the MFI segment, 60% of the so-called guys who are dead have had at least one sort of digital footprint, wherein they've pinged some other entity for a loan or some other vehicle loan, some agri loan or something. So they're just lying low, waiting for the claim to be paid. Now, and that's where the conundrum is. We can suddenly jump and say, no, we can't share any data and put the locks. But then we're not weeding out what do you do about fraud? What do you do about, how do you identify when a person has done something wrong? Where is that check and balance? And without that, I don't see financial services really being able to give a differentiated service to the guy who's honest.
Yeah.
I think,
Sandeep, if I could butt in, I think just to build on what, she just said, I think, even in US, it's a small anecdote I wanted to give you, and I think we talked about that. There's a friend of mine in the Valley who does a lot of analytics work and all that. So he was sharing something with me that there is a generational difference. So the entire debate about data privacy is more with the slightly older generation. And he's done a proper survey.
Yeah.
The youngsters there are saying, tell me what value do I get for value given. So if I share my data, what value do I get?
That's
so
a very good point.
It's a lot more transactional in
Yeah.
a manner of speaking. Yeah. So this thing if I could use that word, so I think this thing is going to evolve as we go forward. And I think sometimes as a country, we have to use a lens which is appropriate to the country and the culture if we want to leapfrog in certain areas. And because if we will continue to follow the rules which are being set globally, let us understand that sometimes those rules may be set in a different context. Yeah. And I think that's an important aspect. On ethics, I just wanted to make one other thing, that as Janmejaya said, it's basically just the beginning. There is so much to be done. Even if you look at driverless cars, which I think we have interest because hopefully consumption of content will go up as more and more driverless cars come in. But if you look at driverless cars, now in these algorithms which are built, if you are coming across, if there is, how would you distinguish between an animal and a person? How would you distinguish between an old person and a small child on the road? How would you distinguish between a child in the car versus an old person on the road? And any of these accident happens, who is liable? How will liability be established? So these are very vexed questions. They need huge deliberation and perhaps will evolve as we go forward. So some of those things are far too, I think what we have to do is to look at what the situation is today, what is the context right for us, what is good for the country as we need to move forward, what are the reasonable boundaries which we draw, and allow a level playing field for everyone to sort of go forward. I think that's what I would like to say. That's because otherwise it gets very complicated.
I think, there's one person who's missing on this stage, and that's somebody from the government. Because I think, it's, the tax department is going to be one of the biggest users of the AI sort of tools that are becoming available. I think Vibha brought up a very interesting point. Fraud management is one of the biggest drivers, I think, of AI usage in India in the near term, and we'll see more of that come from the government. But with this, I'd like to actually open it up to questions from the audience, and to anybody in the panel that you'd like to ask questions. There's a question there.
Hi, this is a question for Ms. Padalkar. Firstly, I'd like to commend you for peer data sharing. I think that's a great step, especially in your industry where you have to look at underwriters and their discipline being one of the greatest places of loss for the insurance industry. But how do you manage data standardization? Because APIs where you have to integrate those kind of different sharing points from different data points, and how do you manage data integrity? Because those two things will be something that really helps you with your efficiency in underwriting time.
Absolutely, and it's critical. I think there was a point that was mentioned on this panel just now about cybersecurity along with data sharing. So we would have, we do have mock attempts at getting into our data on every 6 months. We also have, because we service 246 partners, big and small, and a lot of them are competing with one another. It is non-negotiable for us that data is not Chinese walls, but I don't know what country's walls, but maybe the Eastern Bloc's walls, wherein it is absolutely non-negotiable. Even within our own various channels, there is a very defined customer ownership policy. So you cannot just randomly dip into the company's data and start calling or mining that data. So we've almost taken it to a level of paranoia about, and IT companies do it all the time. So it's nothing that hasn't been done. It's a question of taking leaf off their books to say, how do you do that? Our investments team, for example, just completely separate, is, you deposit your mobile phones outside before you get into the dealing room. So those sorts of things are also beginning to happen wherein very sensitive data is shared. But mask data is another. It's required by the Data Protection Act in India. So the masking of that data, of having a vault for that data. So one has it's non-negotiable on being compliant in those things. But those are all things that one needs to, it's a non-negotiable. But the benefits that can come out of it, I mean, at least amongst the middle class, most of youngsters have all their data on Facebook. Everything is open. So what are we talking about really in terms of protection is something that one needs to ask, at least in terms of Aadhaar, and if Aadhaar and biometric, for example. So yeah, it is a trade-off. No easy answers, but I don't think any economy has easy answers. Why India?
Sorry to extend that question to Mr. Singhi. You told me that, you mentioned about your data practices. How do you feel, and not for Ms. Padalkar because she has to deal with individuals who are privately or personally identifiable, but maybe in your operations you could have something like pseudonymous data where you can see the interactions between different people or different data points without knowing who they are, but still gathering that data for analysis on your policies and or operations going forward.
Well, that's for you.
Yeah. So I think, as you rightly said, a lot of the data which we want to now sort of share is what we call an NPID, which is non-personally identifiable data. And you could share it at individual levels and at cohorts levels. And also, I think, as it is, there are a lot of algorithms and things which are being built or to basically further do a lot of work around lookalike. Because see, at the same time, one of the challenges which we have is there are these debates which are happening on data, but the advertiser wants data in digital to be as targeted as possible. They are saying, ideally they would say, reach out to Janmejaya, Sinha or Sudhanshu, Vats. I think that's what they want. And I think at one level, I don't see it's incorrect. I think it's perhaps their desire to sort of personalize it and micro-target it to the level of one. So I think what we do is we use as Vibha also referred to it, I think, you can mask it, and we call that NPID, which is non-personally identifiable data. It could be individual, it could be cohorts, it could be so on and so forth. So, and that is a term which is very frequently used, and that's the way the transactions are allowed.
Next.
Yeah, so my name is Naveen Kshatriya, and I was listening to this conversation. very interesting. But I think the point which Janmejaya made about the changing understanding of ethics, which is across different worlds today, I think that particular approach is still valid in data collection itself, because we are at early stages. So every unit or entity or business or association is looking at the possibility of using that data for the self-interest. You know, how will it improve my efficiency? How will it improve my effectiveness? And therefore, how will I compete better? And therefore, how will I make more money? And that was true many years ago when people started manufacturing. They got IPs and they got control. They charged more money, and then things went to other people, and that went down. So that's an evolution which will take place. And I'm taking this in context of this will remain, but what will happen more and more in my judgment is that people will realize that this data and this artificial intelligence will have two types of impact. One is an impact at an individual level, which is at a micro business level, and the other will be at a macro level, which is at state and at government. For example, let's take healthcare. Why won't artificial intelligence or data be used to predict things like SARS, things like Zika, etc., which will not only affect every individual but also affect the society? Take the example of medical practice, and I know a little bit more about that, not because I'm a doctor, because I study a lot. There's lots of work going on. Would it not be nice, rather than millions of doctors interpreting the same data in different fashion, in a subjective way, and delivering the results in a fashion which is inefficient and ineffective? And that's overall improvement of the society. And therefore, there will be many such examples. I'll give you another one.
Yeah.
I'll give you another one. For example, in cars, everybody is driving. Sorry.
Sorry, on the stage, sir. So if you could just keep it slightly short. We're running out of time.
So the
so
last,
if you have a question, yeah.
So therefore, what I'm saying is, why are we afraid of this? Why are we taking a negative and a positive view today? Why are we not seeing that this is an early stage and evolve to a more mature society, and there'll be segregation? There'll be some things good for individual units and some things good for society.
I don't think anyone is saying that this is there's.
So I just want to, I just want to say that it's not about, but I think there are ethics involved. I think in the audience there is my colleague Prabhat Pani from Tata Trust. They've set up the largest cancer grid in India, and the oncology treatment and oncology interpretation is now being done with AI, with machine learning, with doctors, with expertise of the best doctors. If you're in a small village, you can still get access to that. I think that shows you power of what data and AI and the networks can do now in medical field. But all we are saying is individual information for interpretation and improving your predictability and treatment is one issue, but sharing that for something else commercial is a completely different context. And I think all of us are standing in the firmly on the line of saying that, for example, in our group, we've got companies which are in entertainment through Tata Sky, we've got communication company, we've got company in FMCG, and no company shares it with another company. We guard the data within the company, and within even divisions don't share with another division, because we think it is very much a personal issue. I think we need to cross that bridge. What is the limit of exposing the data? And I said mass data is something sometimes you share. Even that we don't know whether it's the right context or not. But we are not saying for improvement of certain services. I think that certainly a lot of work is going on. And I took the very example which you mentioned. And actually it is the largest network in the world today.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, last question for this panel.
Okay. I'm Sudeep, I'm from L&T. Somehow I felt that none of the panelists has touched upon the AI and the patents and how, as a country or large companies that you belong to, how you will be building the patents for the country, the next generation with AI. All of you are talking about today, whether it works, whether it doesn't work, whether how you're working, pretty transactional to me. What are you doing for the next 5 years to build patents for your industry, for the country? Thank you.
I'll just give a quick answer. I think a lot of companies are doing a lot of work, and I just don't want to venture where I don't know much, but I'll certainly touch upon a few of the work. This is such an early stage, the data and analytics field. For example, the TCS is today running the world's best benchmarking process and program for data maturity, which is called DATOM. I think you can go on Google and check that out. It is something which even the Gartner and the best in the world acknowledge as a benchmark process to adhere to. But IP is getting generated, and I think bigger companies are pouring money into it, and you alluded to that. I think people are beginning to touch it, but it's still not the core and central, as Janmejaya said. And I also believe it is still not the very central and core. It is we are learning to bite it bit by bit. But AI is on us, and it will come at some point, and in the long run. And that long run may not be 10 years; it may be 5 years. Who knows?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Can we have a round of applause for our panel? Ma'am, I'm sorry we're out of time. If you could take.